Twice, 350 years apart, a foreign fleet sailed proudly up the very same river, utterly certain of victory. Twice, that same river swallowed them whole, impaled upon a forest of hidden iron-tipped stakes planted beneath its muddy water. Sit with me a while and hear of the river and the patient general who first taught it how to kill an empire's fleet. His name was Ngo Quyen, and the idea he planted in a muddy riverbed would end 1,000 years of foreign rule. Let us begin in a land that had not truly ruled itself in nearly 1,000 years, ground beneath a distant, ancient empire. Since long before memory, the land the Vietnamese called their own had lived as a distant, restless province of Chinese empires. Generation after generation had grown up knowing no other reality, paying tribute and taxes to governors sent from far away. Rebellions had flared occasionally across those centuries, brief flashes of defiance quickly and thoroughly crushed by imperial armies. But by the early 10th century, the great Chinese empire itself had begun fracturing into rival, squabbling successor kingdoms. In this weakening moment, ambitious local Vietnamese lords began quietly testing just how much genuine autonomy they might seize. Generations of quiet cultural endurance had kept a distinct Vietnamese identity alive, even beneath centuries of foreign administration. That endurance now met genuine opportunity, as distant imperial attention turned inward toward China's own worsening internal chaos. Generations of quiet cultural endurance had kept a distinct Vietnamese identity alive, even beneath centuries of foreign administration. That endurance now met opportunity, as distant imperial attention turned inward toward China's own worsening internal chaos. Among these rising local lords was Duong Dinh Ngo, a capable governor who had already carved out genuine practical autonomy. His trusted general and son-in-law was a sturdy, patient man named Ngo Quyen, respected for his calm military competence. Ngo Quyen governed a coastal province personally, earning a reputation as fair, disciplined, and quietly formidable in matters of war. This fragile arrangement of growing Vietnamese autonomy, however, rested upon the uncertain loyalty of ambitious, treacherous men. Ngo Quyen himself had married into this powerful family, binding his own fortunes closely to his father-in-law's fragile authority. He could not yet know how swiftly and how violently that fragile arrangement was about to collapse entirely around him. In 937, an ambitious officer named Kieu Cong Tine assassinated Duong Dinh Ngo, seizing power through sudden, treacherous violence. Ngo Quyen, furious and determined to avenge his murdered father-in-law, immediately began gathering loyal forces to march against the usurper. Desperate and thoroughly outmatched, Kieu Cong Tine made a catastrophic decision that would haunt the entire region for years. He appealed directly to the Southern Han, a Chinese kingdom based in the south, begging for military intervention on his behalf. The Southern Han court, sensing a golden opportunity to reassert control over the rebellious province, agreed with genuine, calculated enthusiasm. A massive invasion fleet was assembled, commanded personally by a confident young prince eager to reclaim a lost imperial province. The prince expected only a swift, celebratory campaign, restoring order to a distant province before returning home in glory. No one within that departing fleet suspected they were sailing directly toward a trap already forming in a patient general's mind. Before this massive foreign fleet could even arrive, Ngo Quyen moved with decisive speed against the treacherous usurper himself. Kieu Cong Tine was defeated and killed swiftly, his brief, treacherous rule ending almost as quickly as it had begun. Yet the invitation to invasion could not simply be withdrawn. the Southern Han fleet was already sailing steadily toward Vietnam's coast. Ngo Quyen now faced this approaching imperial fleet alone, without the excuse of a usurper to blame and without any real allies. Rather than despair, he turned his full attention toward the specific, familiar terrain that might yet turn the tide entirely in his favor. The Bach Dang River, which the invading fleet would have to sail, rose and fell dramatically with the powerful ocean tide. At high tide, the river ran deep and wide, easily large enough to carry the Southern Han's largest, heaviest warships. At low tide, the very same river shrank dramatically, exposing wide muddy banks and a shallow, narrow central channel. Ngo Quyen recognized, studying this pattern closely, a devastating opportunity that no invading admiral would ever think to suspect. He gathered local fishermen and villagers who understood these tidal rhythms intimately, learning every subtle detail of the river's behavior. Their generations of quiet, practical knowledge would prove far more valuable than any grand fleet or aristocratic warrior's pedigree. He ordered his soldiers to cut hundreds of sturdy wooden stakes, sharpen their tips, and reinforce them with iron for added strength. Under cover of darkness, these stakes were driven deep into the riverbed itself, planted firmly across the river's central channel. At high tide, the rising water concealed this deadly forest entirely, leaving the river looking calm, deep, and perfectly inviting. Only at low tide would the trap's true, deadly nature become visible, by which point any fleet caught within it would be doomed. The Southern Han fleet arrived at the river's mouth precisely as the tide was rising, finding the deep water exactly as expected. Ngo Quyen sent a small, deliberately weak force to meet them, provoking a confident pursuit deeper into the waiting river. The Chinese prince, sensing easy victory, pressed his entire fleet eagerly forward, chasing the retreating Vietnamese ships upriver. Vietnamese ships continued retreating steadily, luring the entire massive fleet deeper into the narrowing, tide-dependent channel. As the pursuit continued, the ocean tide itself began, inevitably and unstoppably, to turn and recede back toward the sea. The Southern Han fleet, deep within the river and utterly unaware, continued its confident pursuit as the water level silently dropped. When Ngo Quyen judged the moment exactly right, his retreating ships suddenly turned, and the real battle began at last. Trapped between falling water and a suddenly aggressive enemy, the Chinese fleet found itself with nowhere safe left to maneuver. As the tide fell further, the hidden forest of sharpened stakes began rising silently beneath the fleeing, panicking Chinese ships. Hull after hull was pierced and grounded, entire ships suddenly immobilized, impaled fast upon the unforgiving riverbed itself. Vietnamese soldiers, who had waited patiently for exactly this moment, now attacked the helplessly stranded fleet without mercy. The Southern Han prince himself was killed in the ensuing slaughter, and his once proud invasion fleet was utterly, completely destroyed. Word of this stunning victory spread rapidly, and any remaining appetite in China for reconquering this troublesome province vanished entirely. In 939, Ngo Quyen formally declared himself king, founding an independent Vietnamese state for the first time in nearly 1,000 years. The long, generational era of direct foreign domination had finally, decisively ended upon the muddy banks of a single tidal river. Ngo Quyen ruled only briefly before his death in 944, yet his singular victory had permanently changed his homeland's entire destiny. For over 3 centuries afterward, the Bach Dang River returned quietly to its ordinary rhythm, rising and falling with each ordinary tide. Then, in 1288, another foreign fleet, this time belonging to the mighty Mongol Empire, found itself retreating along this very same river. The Vietnamese General Tran Hung Dao, remembering Ngo Quyen's brilliant tactic from 3 centuries before, planted the very same trap once more. Once again, sharpened stakes rose silently from the falling tide, and once again, a foreign imperial fleet was utterly destroyed. Twice now, separated by 350 years, the very same river had swallowed an empire's ambitions whole. Ngo Quyen's true legacy was never simply one battle, brilliant as it was, but the proof that clever preparation could defeat overwhelming force. He taught a lesson that outlived him by centuries, that a homeland's own rivers, mountains, and tides could become its fiercest defenders. Today, the Bach Dang River still flows quietly through the Vietnamese countryside, its muddy banks giving no hint of the empires it once swallowed. This has been the story of Ngo Quyen, and the river that learned, twice, exactly how to kill an invading empire's proudest fleet. Sleep now and remember that the quietest, most ordinary places sometimes hide the sharpest lessons history has ever taught.